Hello and welcome to Fundamentals of Cybersecurity, CSCI150N. I'm Peter Keurig, your instructor, and this is Chapter 14, Systems Hardening and Baselines. In this chapter, you will learn how to harden operating systems and network operating systems, implement host-level security, harden applications, establish group policies, and secure alternative environments such as SCADA and industrial control systems. So for this chapter, we'll do an overview of baselines, operating systems and network operating system hardening, host security, host-based security controls, network hardening, application hardening, group policies, security templates, and alternative environments. So the process of baselining is the process of establishing a system's security state, and the resulting product is a security baseline that allows the system to run safely and securely. To secure systems effectively and consistently, you must have a structured and a logical approach. As a best practice, anything that is not required for operation should be removed or disabled on the system. Then all the appropriate patches, hotfixes, and settings should be applied to protect and secure it. Once the process has been completed for a particular hardware or software combination, any similar systems can be configured with the same baseline to achieve the same level and depth of security and protection. Uniform baselines are critical in large-scale operations because maintaining separate configurations and security levels for hundreds or thousands of systems is far too costly. So, for example, in the military, we use something called the Security Technical Implementation Guide, or a STIG, to set the security baseline for a system. We usually image the system once it's been done, and we use that image to re-image all the different systems that are going on our networks. The operating system of a computer, or OS, is the basic software that handles things such as input, output, display, memory management, and all other highly detailed tasks required to support the user environment and associated applications. Most users are familiar with Microsoft family of desktop operating systems, such as Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 10. Indeed, the vast majority of home and business PCs run some version of Microsoft operating system. Others that you may be familiar with are Mac OS X, Solaris, and a variety of different Linux and Unix operating systems. A network operating system is an operating system that includes additional functions and capabilities to assist with connecting computers and devices such as printers to a local area network. Many of the more familiar network operating systems include Novell, NetWare, PC Micro's Lantastic. For most modern operating systems, including Windows, Solaris, and Linux, the term operating system and network operating system are used interchangeably as they perform the basic functions and provide enhanced capabilities of connecting to LANs. I've worked in environments that use Novell, and most of these network operating systems that rode on top of a operating system have pretty much left or do not seem to be in use anymore. There may be some outliers out there, but Novell and PC Micro Lantastic are pretty much at this point dead due to Microsoft Windows and Mac OS and the current Linux iterations all including network capabilities into their operating systems. So with operating systems, the operating system itself is the foundation of system security. The operating system does this through the use of a security kernel. The security kernel is also known as the reference monitor and is the component of the operating system that enforces the security policies of the operating system. The core of the OS is constructed so that all operations must pass through and be moderated by the security kernel, placing it in complete control over the enforcement of rules. Protection rings were devised in the Multic operating system in the 1960s to deal with security issues associated with time-sharing operations. Protection rings can be enforced by hardware, software, or a combination, and serve to act as a means of managing privilege in a hierarchical manner. As you can see in this diagram, the lower or innermost ring has the highest level of privileges, and as you move out, the privileges get a little more reduced. So your core or your most important function is your inner ring, which is your kernel, which is the security kernel, followed by the device drivers, which controls the input and output of attached devices. libraries which underlie applications and interface with device drivers and the kernel, and then the applications themselves. So with the operating system, we talked about the Security Technical Implementation Guides, or STIGs, that would help to configure an operating system to be more secure. Well, those same STIGs can be applied to machine hardening. The primary method of controlling the security impact of a system on a network is to reduce the available attack surface, or all the different places where attack could be done against the system. So first off, turning off all services that are not needed or permitted by policy will reduce the number of vulnerabilities. So if you don't need FTP, don't turn on FTP, or set up secure FTP instead of regular FTP. Same thing with Telnet. You can allow SSH and turn off Telnet, things of that sort. Removing methods of connecting additional devices to a workstation to move data, such as optical drives and USB ports. Assisting in controlling the movement of data into and out of the device. So I'll tell you now, pretty much within the military, we don't allow USB storage devices to be attached. We disable the ports for USB to prevent that from happening. And then user level controls, such as limiting email attachment options, screening all attachments at the email server level, and reducing network shares to needed shares only, can be used to limit the excessive connectivity that can impact security. So once again, going back to OS hardening, system hardening is the process of preparing and securing the system, and it involves the removal of all unnecessary software and services. So if you don't need it, if you don't need Telnet, turn it off. The base installation of all operating systems and application software comes from a trusted source, and it is verified as correct by using hash values. Machines are connected only to a completely trusted network during the installation, hardening, and update processes. The base installation includes all current service packs and updates for both the OS and any applications that are pre-installed. And then current backup images are taken after hardening and updates to facilitate system restoration to a known state. So as I stated before, we tend to build our image, use the STIGs, apply all of our updates, and create the ideal computer for our network, make an image or a snapshot of it, and we use it to image all of our new computers or computers that need a re-imaging for whatever the reason be. Now, hardening Windows itself, you want to seek or establish guidelines for hardening the system. So things such as STIGs, there's plenty of open source ones out there that you can download for a checklist of things you can do to harden a system. Enable or install security features, so make sure things like the Windows Firewall, antivirus, and Windows Defender are turned on. Conduct a vulnerability scan, so you'll use a product like OpenVAS or Nessus to scan the system to ensure that all the vulnerabilities on there have been locked down, turned off, or patched. Use encryption, such as full disk encryption like BitLocker. Then utilize such tools as Microsoft Security Compliance Manager and the Attack Surface Analyzer to look for other configurations that could be locked down to secure the operating system or Windows specifically. And then set up, it's not in the book, but set up user and admin accounts separate of each other. Typical users should not be operating in a administrative mode at all times. So have them log in as a typical user with, let's say, the capability to install software turned off. And then if they go to install software, it requires them to present admin credentials in order to do it. This helps to protect the system, because this way, if somebody accidentally downloads something or intentionally downloads something and tries to install on a system that'll make it less secure, at the very least, it requires that they have to escalate their privileges to admin, and it doesn't just automatically install and you don't know about it as the administrator. For the most part, hardening Linux, Unix, and Mac OS is pretty much the same. It just had different technical ways of doing it. Once again, seek guidelines for hardening the systems and enable and install any security features necessary. In Linux in particular, you want to set user permissions using the change mod, change group, and change own commands. Once again, you want to use encryption and utilize tools that are available on the internet specifically for Linux. Then with Mac, mandatory access controls for accessing system resources, tag downloads, disable executions, library randomizations, file vault, application-aware firewalls, preemptive multitasking and memory protection, gatekeeper, and app sandbox. Updates are a hot topic for me. One study shows that 80% of all major breaches happen because of software that is outdated by 6 months or more and already had fixed for the problem that was used as a means of exploiting the system. So in updates, you want to understand the difference between a hotfix, a patch, and a service pack. So hotfix, this is a term that is usually a small software update designed to address a specific problem, such as a buffer overflow in an application that exposes the system to attack. Hotfixes are typically developed in reaction to a discovered problem and are produced then released rather quickly. Hotfixes typically address critical security-related issues and should be applied to the affected application or operating system as soon as possible. Patches is the term usually applied to a more formal, larger software update that may address several or many security problems. Patches often contain enhancements or additional capabilities as well as fixes for known bugs. Patches are usually developed over a longer period of time. Then finally, service packs. So you guys have seen this with Windows, for example, like right now, Windows 7 Service Pack 1 or something of that sort. This term is usually given to a larger collection of patches and hotfixes rolled into a single, rather large package. Service packs are designed to bring a system up to the latest known good level all at once, rather than requiring the user or system administrator to download dozens or hundreds of updates separately. First off, malware is any kind of software program that produces a negative effect on your computer system. So it's a very broad, encompassing term. So when we talk anti-malware, it's very broad and encompassing, and it can contain many different possible products underneath it. So your antivirus is just of anti-malware suite of products, and with antivirus, you want to run it on all your workstations as well as your servers in order to catch any virus at an early stage. Another thing to note about the antivirus is it focuses just on viruses which are capable of self-replicating and spreading themselves. So it doesn't cover other types of malware unless the product itself specifies it as doing so. Anti-spam is the capability to reduce spam coming into your network. It's usually installed on your mail server, or you might put it, if you're using something like Microsoft Exchange, it could be a plugin that goes into the local Outlook client. Anti-spyware, it's things like Malwarebytes. It goes through and it finds spyware that's not necessarily a virus, doesn't necessarily do any real harm, but it compromises security through the sense of confidentiality, such as tracking what websites you go to and maybe pushing advertisements to your computer, things of that sort. So anti-spyware will go through, find that software, and remove it in any registry entries that it makes. Windows Defenders here, because it's built into the operating system now, and it does a fairly good job with preventing malware from being installed on the system or in detecting malware that is installed on the systems. Then pop-up blockers, particularly important ever since Windows XP, with the malware, and we'll talk about it in just a little bit, the antivirus malware pop-ups that were coming around. So by blocking pop-ups, it prevents many malware installations that were part of drive-by websites and things of that sort that would take advantage of flaws within Internet Explorer, at least in the older versions of it, and we're starting to see a resurgence of it again too. So pop-up blockers are extremely important, at the very least, to save the sanity of your users from continuous pop-ups on different sites that they go to. So when we talked about firewalls, we talked about blacklisting and whitelisting. Well, the same comes true with applications on a system. So a blacklist is essentially noting which applications should not be allowed to run on a system. So if you basically know that BearShare, Nutella, Napster, all the different file sharing software, you don't want that to run on your system, you can specify them in a blacklist and not allow them to run on the system. Whitelisting is just the opposite. It's allowing only specific software to run in your system, and all other software won't be allowed to run. Then there's software restrictive policies employed via group policies and allows significant control over applications, scripts, and executable files. The primary mode is by machine and not by user account. And software restrictive policies can help enhance the whitelisting with enabling what certain applications can and can't do. Then there's user account level controls enforced by AppLocker, a service that allows granular control over which users can execute which programs. Through the use of rules, enterprise can exert significant control over who can access and use installed software. We use this ourselves. Trusted operating system is an operating system designed to allow multiple levels of security on it. This is further defined by its ability to meet a series of critical requirements placed by the U.S. government on the systems. Trusted OSs are expensive to create and maintain because any change must typically undergo a recertification process. The most common criteria used to define a trusted OS is the Common Criteria for Information Technology Security Evaluation. There are different trusted OSs out there. For example, there are versions of Windows out there that have been certified as a trusted OS. Linux, mainframe OSs, and specialty OSs have been qualified to various common criteria levels. Host-based firewalls. Personal firewalls are host-based protective mechanisms that monitor and control traffic passing into and out of a single system. Designed for the end user, software firewalls often have a configurable security policy that allows the user to determine which traffic is good and allowed to pass, and which traffic is bad and blocked. Software firewalls are extremely commonplace, so much so that most modern OSs come with some type of personal firewall included. Windows is no exception to that, and some of you might have noted from the earlier labs in this class, we had to disable the Windows 7 firewall in order for us to be able to complete some labs. Hardware security. This kind of circles back around to physical security when we talked about hardware in the form of servers, workstations, and even mobile devices can represent a weakness and a vulnerability in the security systems associated with an enterprise. I stated before that if I can physically gain access to a device, most likely I can get into the system itself. Data or information can be safeguarded from loss by backups, obviously, but this is little in the way of protecting it from disclosure from an unauthorized party. There are software measures that can assist in the form of encryption, but these also have drawbacks in the form of scalability and key distribution. There are some hardware protection mechanisms that should be employed to safeguard information in servers, workstations, and mobile devices, such as cable locks can be employed on mobile devices to prevent theft. Locking cabinets and safes can be used to secure portable media, USB drives, and CDs and DVDs. So when you go into places like hotels or whatever, if you have an in-room safe, lock your device in there when you're not carrying it. If there is none, I carry myself a cable and I lock it to a big piece of furniture within the room. If I'm not taking the device with me, or if I'm traveling, I'll make sure first thing I do is I put laptops or other devices into the trunk of the car before I go someplace. If you're putting it in the trunk once you get there, somebody who's watching will know that the devices are there in the trunk. Host security baselining. To secure software on a system effectively and consistently, you must take a structured and logical approach, just like we talked about with operating systems. This starts with an examination of the system's intended function and capabilities to determine what processes and applications will be housed on the system. This process of establishing a software's base security state is called, once again, baselining, and the resulting product is a security baseline that allows the software to run safely and securely. Software and hardware can be tied intimately together when it comes to security, so they must be considered together. After administrators have finished patching, securing, and preparing a system, they often create an initial baseline configuration. This represents a secure state for the system or network device and a reference point of the software and its configuration. So with software baselining, for at least systems that I work with, we have a predefined list of all the approved software, and we pre-install it on the image. So we create that baseline operating system image, things such as Microsoft Windows, Adobe Reader, flash and all that is incorporated into this image. And then if we need specific software for an individual, we'll install that specifically. But this way we know all the software that's in it. We ensure that all of it is up to date in the image with the most current version, and we have an idea what our security baseline is. So looking at host-based security controls, one of the first things we look at is hardware-based encryption devices. So for example, the Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, is a hardware solution on the motherboard, one that assists with the generation of keys and storage as well as random number generation. When the encryption keys are stored in the TPM, they are not accessible via normal software channels and are physically separated from the hard drive and other encrypted data locations. This makes the TPM a more secure solution than storing keys on the device's normal storage or on something like a thumb drive. So, for example, BitLocker could use the TPM to store the key for the hard drive encryption, or BitLocker can save the key onto a USB device, preferably the TPM. A hardware security module is a device that is used to manage or store encryption keys. It can also assist in cryptographic operations such as encryption, hashing, or the application of digital signatures. HSMs are typically peripheral devices connected via USB or network connection. HSMs have tamper protection mechanisms to prevent physical access to the secrets they protect. Because of their dedicated design, they can offer significant performance advantages over general-purpose computers when it comes to cryptographic operations. When an enterprise has significant levels of cryptographic operations, HSMs can provide throughput efficiencies. Universal Serial Bus encryption offers data protection on a external storage device. Many mechanisms exist, from encryption on the USB device itself to OS-enabled encryption to independent encryption before moving the data. Each of these mechanisms have advantages and disadvantages, and it is ultimately up to the user to choose what is the best method based on the sensitivity of the data. So for example, you can use BitLocker on a USB drive, you can use BitLocker on a USB hard drive, things of that sort, to encrypt the entire drive, or you could use something like PGP or GPG that we used previously in this class to encrypt the specific file, then save that file to the USB device. Hard drives exist to store information. Having the drive itself offer encryption services can provide flexibility in terms of performance and security. It is possible to buy hard drives with integrated AES encryption so that the drive content is secured and the keys can be stored separately in a TPM. This offers significant performance and security enhancement over other software-based solutions. So let's look at the different types of data encryption. Full disk encryption refers to the act of encrypting an entire partition in one operation. Then, as specific elements are needed, those particular sectors can be decrypted for use. This offers a simple convenience factor and ensures that all of the data is protected. It does come at a performance cost, as the act of decrypting and encrypting takes time. Major database engines have built-in encryption capabilities. The advantage to these encryption schemes is that they can tailor the data structure, protecting the essential columns while not impacting columns that are not sensitive. Properly employing database encryption requires that the data schema and its security requirements be designed into the database implementation. Then individual files, as we just talked about with PGP or GPG, can be encrypted as well in a system. This can be done either at the OS level or via third-party application. Managing individual file encryption can be tricky, as the problem moves to a encryption key security problem. When using built-in encryption methods with an operating system, the key issue is resolved by the OS itself, with a single key being employed and stored within the user's credentials. Removable media, by its very nature, can be moved to another location, making the security of the data stored on the device essential. Encryption becomes the tool of choice, and a wide range of encryption methods and applications support the protection of removable media. Microsoft BitLocker, once again, it's built into the current edition of Enterprise, Ultimate, and Pro OSs, offers the ability to protect data stored on removable media. Mobile device security is also essential when critical or sensitive data is transmitted to mobile devices. The protection of mobile devices goes beyond simple encryption of the data, as the device can act as an authorized endpoint for the system, opening up avenues of attack. So sometimes when we talk about data security, we talk about what state is the data in. And essentially there are three states. There's data in transit, data at rest, and data in use. Data in transit is data being moved from one system to another. The most common method of protection in this case is encryption. What is important is to ensure that the data is always protected in the proportion to the degree of risk associated with a data security failure. Data at rest refers to data being stored. Data is stored in a variety of formats, in files, databases, and structured elements. Encryption is the best means of protecting data at rest against unauthorized access or alterations. And finally, data in use is data being processed in applications. It can be at risk when the system memory, even in the act of processing. Protecting data while in use is a much trickier proposition than protecting it in transit or storage. While encryption can be used in the other two situations, it is not practical to perform operations on encrypted data. This means that other means need to be taken to protect that data. Protected memory schemas and address space layout randomization are two tools that can be used to prevent data security failures during processing. Secure coding practices or principles include the definitive wiping of critical data elements once they are no longer needed, and can assist in protecting data in use. So there are tools out there that literally, as the data is being processed, can grab the data from the buffer that the process is working on. So you can have all the encryption, the best encryption in the world, to protect it on transit or while it's sitting at rest on the hard drive. But while it's in that buffer, it is completely exposed. And this is why tools such as the anti-malware tools we previously talked about are so important. You want to make sure that there are no processes that are unauthorized running on your system that might be pulling data from the memory. And one of the things we learn when working with data forensics is if you can capture memory, you can capture a lot of things such as passwords and other important data while it's still in an unsecured state. So often when you're dealing with, say, capturing a hard drive from a suspect, is capturing that memory, so you have all the passwords that person would normally use before it's lost by turning off the machine. You want to capture it while it's in memory. So in enterprise IT lately, one of the big buzzwords is big data. Big data is the industry buzzword for very large data sets being used in many enterprises. Data sets are into petabytes, exabytes, and even zettabyte ranges are now being explored in some applications. Data sets of these sizes require special hardware and software to handle them, but this does not alleviate the need for security. Planning for security on this scale requires enterprise-level thinking, but it is worth noting that essentially some subsets of the information makes its way to a host machine for use. It is at this point that the data is vulnerable, because whatever protection schema is in place for the large data storage system, the data is outside of its realm now. So as we were just talking about in the last slide, where data in process, the data is vulnerable because in the buffer of the system, you could have a large exabyte database that's being stored and protected by the database management system. But when you pull the pieces of data from it to process it, which is the whole purpose for having this data, while you're processing it, that data is not encrypted, that data is not protected. You have to start thinking about where is it being processed. Is it being processed on a controlled mainframe or a controlled server, or is it being processed on endpoints? And then you have to start building your security for that unprotected data around the particular systems that are processing that data unprotected. So another big buzzword is the cloud. And in this particular case in the book, we're talking about cloud storage and cloud computing. Cloud computing is the use of online resources for storage, processing, or both. When storing data in the cloud, encryption can be used to protect the data. So that is what is actually stored is the encrypted data, not the unprotected data. This reduces the risk of data disclosure, both in transit to the cloud and back, as well in storage. Now, the important thing to remember about the cloud is it's only as safe as the company you are contracted to. You have no idea who the personnel are who maintains these cloud services or servers. You can only hope that the company that you're working with is doing proper background checks and so forth for the personnel that are working there. But in reality, you don't know who it is. A lot of these companies outsource to foreign countries for cheaper labor. Therefore, you have to assume that you don't want whoever is administrating those systems to have access to your data. So you want to encrypt the data before it gets to their storage. Otherwise, if you're encrypting it using their encryption on their storage, they have access to it. For those of you who have worked in a Microsoft environment, you know that you can encrypt different users' home directories on your servers, but the administrators still have access to it and can access the data. So just think of that when you're thinking of cloud storage. Your administrators on the cloud storage have access to your data. You want to encrypt it before it gets out there. So we kind of touched on this back when we talked about physical devices some chapters back. Storage area networks. Storage area network is a means of storing data across a secondary dedicated network. SANs operate to connect data storage devices as if they were local storage, yet they are separate and can be collections of disks, tapes, and other storage devices. Because the dedicated network is separate from the normal IP network, accessing the SAN requires going through one of the attached machines. This makes SANs a bit more secure than other forms of storage, although loss through a compromised client machine is still a risk. Access control lists form one of the foundational basis for security on a machine. ACLs can be used by the operating system to make determinations as to whether or not a user can access a resource. This level of permission restriction offers significant protection of resources and transfers the management of the access control problem to the management of ACLs, a smaller, more manageable problem. Chances are each of you in my class either have a wireless network at home or at least some device capable of connecting to a wireless network. In order for that to happen, with all these different vendors and companies out there that make these devices, we need to have a standardized protocol. In this case, IEEE 802.11 is the series of protocols that are available for manufacturers to use to develop wireless devices. It's agreed upon specifications, capabilities in order for them to all work and interoperate together. Now, wireless networking is the transmission of packetized data by means of a physical topology that does not use direct physical links. So more specifically for us, when we're talking wireless, we're talking about using radio waves to carry the signal, either over public or private frequencies or bands. Then when we talk about Bluetooth, we're talking about short-range wireless protocol, typically used on small devices such as mobile phones to create what's called a personal area network. And we'll go into that in a little bit. So just like operating systems, software needs to be updated in the network devices. Maintaining current vendor patch levels for the infrastructure that runs the network is one of the most important things you can do to maintain security. Any managed equipment that is responding on network ports will have some software or firmware controlling it. This software or firmware needs to be updated on a regular basis. The most common device that connects people to the internet is the network router. Dozens of brands of routers are available on the market, but Cisco's products dominate. Its popularity has fueled research into vulnerabilities in the code, and over the past few years, quite a few vulnerabilities have been reported. These vulnerabilities can take many forms because the routers send and receive several different types of traffic. This highlights the need to update Cisco iOS software on a regular basis. And you'll see the updates are fairly regular, at least quarterly. So one of the things I like to do, if I can't get into a network particularly, because let's say their firewalls are very well configured, or other perimeter defenses are keeping me from getting in, I might try to do a denial of service to the system by taking advantage of network devices along the way. So for example, if you did an Nmap and you gathered all the different OS versions of all the network devices along the path to the network that you're trying to do a denial of service, you might find that one of the devices, one of the critical devices like a router, has an older version of the iOS running on it. Therefore, you can start researching what are the known vulnerabilities for that older version of iOS, and you can exploit those vulnerabilities. So you want to make sure that your iOS and that your ISP is using the most current versions of the software. You can also make it a contractual obligation that they provide a minimum baseline of security on their devices as part of their corporate contract with you. So once again, just like operating systems, because really this is an operating system, you want to make sure that the device configuration for the network devices is properly done as well. So you want to limit access to only those who need access to the network device itself. So your administrators choose good passwords or use certificate authentication, which is possible with Cisco devices. Password protect console and remote access. Turn off unnecessary services. For example, turn off Telnet on your Cisco devices and just use SSH. And change the SMP community strings to something other than the default strings, and something that's not going to be easy to guess as well, because SMP can do a lot on your network. So most of you coming into this course should have already started Cisco training, but I'm not sure if you've gotten to the point of virtual LANs yet. Virtual LANs or VLANs is a group of hosts that communicate as if they were on the same broadcast domain, but you could have multiple VLANs on the same switch or physical network segment, but they don't necessarily talk to each other because they all see each other's differently. So for example, let's say you have an iScheme of 192.168.10.1, then another one of 192.168.20.1. You have the 10. You could have one be the 10 VLAN and one be the 20 VLAN, and they could be sharing the same switch and the same port off the router, but they don't see each other because they're on two different virtual networks. A VLAN is a logical construct that can be used to help control broadcast domains, manage traffic flow, and restrict traffic between organizations, divisions, and so on. Layer 2 switches, by definition, will not bridge IP traffic across VLANs, which gives administrators the ability to segment traffic quite effectively, which is what I was just talking about. They share the same switch, and they go under the router, sharing the same port on the router, but they don't see each other, even though they're physically on the same segment. By controlling the members of a VLAN, administrators can logically separate network traffic throughout the organization. So for example, when we were talking about networks, we had a marketing department on one and an IT department on another VLAN, even though they were sharing the same switches and the routers. They did not see each other, and you could control what traffic went onto which network to reduce the amount of traffic on certain segments of the network. So once again, deja vu. IPv4 versus IPv6. As we read in previous chapters, IPv4 is the de facto communication standard used in almost every network around the planet right now. Unfortunately, it contains some inherent shortcomings and vulnerabilities. Then IPv6 is designed to speed up the packet processing by routers and supply more addresses in the address space. Additionally, it does have built-in mandatory support for network layer security. Although widely adopted under IPv4, IPsec support is mandatory in IPv6, and the issue now is one of conversion. Many organizations are still using IPv4 across their entire enterprise and have not started with IPv6. You are starting to see IPv6 more on the global scale and on the backbone and network infrastructure scale, but you're still not seeing it on the end workstations too often at this point. Many operating systems and devices currently support dual IP stacks and can run both IPv4 and IPv6 at the same time. So what if I told you 80% of your breaches came from the same set of software? 80% of breaches come from versions of third-party software that are 6 months or more out of date with the most current version, and top 3 of that list are Adobe Reader, Adobe Flash, and Oracle Java. All of those present problems with providing elevated privileges to user systems, and you'll see the most often used vector for attack. Sites that have Flash in it that push malware through the Flash scripting or through scripting that's embedded in PDF files, and then Java applications that manipulate elevated privileges within the host environment. So perhaps as important as the operating system and network hardening is application hardening, securing an application against local and internet-based attacks. Hardening applications is fairly similar to hardening operating systems. You remove the functions or components you don't need and restrict access where you can, and make sure that the application is kept up to date with patches. In most cases, the last step in that list is the most important for maintaining application security. After all, applications must be accessible to users or else they serve no purpose, as most problems with applications tend to be buffer overflow in legitimate user input fields. Patching the application is often the only way to secure it from attack. And then you want to also properly configure the software. For example, in Java, you can go in and set the security levels on it and what it is capable of doing and not capable of doing. For example, you could have unsigned Java applications not execute. You can have trusted sites for downloading Java, and can determine if you want to grant the signed applications the capability to execute without being prompted, or require prompting. You can disable altogether the capability for unsigned applications to be run, or require prompting for that as well. You can specify the certificate chain of trust for the Java applications. Once again, just like the operating system, you want to have a configuration baseline for applications. Applications will have recommended security and functionality settings. In some cases, vendors will provide those recommended settings, and in other cases, an outside organization such as the NSA, ISSA, or SANS will provide recommended configurations for popular applications. Many large organizations will develop their own application configuration baselines. For example, the military uses the STIGs, as we were previously talking about. Those STIGs are not only for operating systems, but specific applications have STIGs as well, such as Java and Internet Explorer. That list of settings, tweaks, and modifications that create a function and hopefully secure applications for use within the organization. Developing an application baseline used any time that an application is deployed within an organization helps to ensure a consistent and hopefully secure configuration across the organization. And very similar to operating systems, the patching and hardening of applications, you'll see three types of things. You'll see hotfixes, patches, and upgrades. Hotfixes, as before, is a small section of code designed to fix a specific problem. Patches are usually collections of fixes that tend to be much larger. And then upgrades are usually a larger set of patches, as well as maybe additional features and stuff. It may involve a version number change within the software that it's updating. When I first started, updates were few and easy to handle. Now applications and operating systems updates are pushed constantly as vendors struggle to provide new capabilities, fix problems, and address vulnerabilities. For example, Microsoft now has created Patch Tuesday in an effort to condense the update cycle and reduce the effort required to maintain its products, and has now gone to a continuous patching of its newest operating systems. In addition to Patch Tuesday, they're also providing now cumulative patching. So for example, Patch Tuesday, you might have 6 or 7 patches come out for the Windows 7 operating system. But now, as of November 2016, they now provide a consolidated set that includes all 6 of those in one single update. It makes it a little bit easier if you're using enterprise patch management. You push one patch or update to all your systems, and it takes care of all of the known releases cumulatively. But they also become very large. So the downside to it is you might be pushing software patches for stuff you don't use or don't have on your operating system. The good part of that is typically speaking, the bundled or consolidated software is usually OS specific, not application specific. So most likely you'll need all those patches on your system, but there are some times when you might not. As the number of patches continue to rise, many organizations struggle to keep up with the patching. Which patches should be applied immediately, which capabilities which is compatible with the current configuration, which is not, and can affect current business operations and so forth. To give an example, a couple of years ago we pushed a patch. There's a typical Microsoft patch, and all of a sudden we had 1,800 machines that are incapable of accessing the internet due to a patch that was pushed and supposedly tested by Microsoft. This is where your patch management becomes critical. So now we make sure everything is tested on a test system before it's pushed out. Now the drawback is it takes longer for these patches to get out there. So the bad guys have time to try to manipulate the known vulnerabilities before the patches are applied. However, because of the problem of just applying patches can break a lot of things, we want to make sure that before we push it out to our systems that it's working properly. We use proper patch management. And one of the important things to that is to always have a rollback plan. Because anything you push out, and I've had this happen even recently as a week ago, anything you push out that doesn't work properly, you need to be able to undo it. And if you can't come up with a rollback plan, then you need to do extra testing before you roll it out because of the potential damage that could be caused by a bad patch. So once a patch has been analyzed and tested, administrators have to determine when to apply the patch. As many patches require a restart of applications and services or even a reboot of the entire system, most operational environments apply patches only at specific times to reduce downtime and possible impact and ensure administrators are available if something goes wrong. So for example, I like to patch on Monday nights because that gives us, if there's a bad patch in the entire work week, to solve the problem during the day. But at the same time, I want to reduce the impact on my users if there's a required restart. Now, usually the exception to this is workstations I patch at night, laptops I patch during the day. And here's a logical reason for that, is the workstations are attached to our network at night, and when nobody's there, it doesn't make a difference. So the whole purpose of doing it at night is you want to be able to do a reboot without affecting the user. Laptops are usually typically only connected during the day, and then the employee brings the laptop home with them. So if I'm only pushing the patches at night, they're not getting the patches. And we saw this as a major problem when I came on board. So I started pushing the patches during the day specifically to laptops. And then on top of that, the restart piece, I don't have them do an automatic restart on the laptops because you know what? At the end of the day, they're going to shut down the laptop and go home. And then they're going to boot it back up the next day. There's my restart for the patch to be properly applied. So it's not uncommon for users, laptop users, to leave at the end of the day and it'll say applying updates to your system, please wait, before it completely shuts down their laptops. Many organizations will also have a rollback plan that allows them to recover the systems back to a known good configuration prior to the patch. This is what I was just talking about in the last slide. In case the patch has unexpected or undesired effects. We pushed out a fix for a SMB issue, trying to disable SMB version 1 this last week, and all of our tests worked fine. We had no problems, but when we pushed out the general rollout, we started getting calls from people who were literally knocked off the network. And luckily, we were able to catch it early enough by pushing it to the laptop users first, so that when they started reporting in issues, we were able to stop it, roll back the configuration for all the systems that hadn't been affected by it yet, and then the systems we needed to that did get implemented on, it was severe enough where the only way to fix it was to actually put hands on it. We weren't able to remotely fix those problems. The issue actually disabled LAN manager so that nobody could remotely get into the machines. Some organizations require extensive coordination and approval of patches prior to implementation, and some institutions lock out dates where no patching or system changes, with few exceptions, can be made to ensure business operations are not disrupted. So a good example of that might be, for example, Amazon might have a lockout period that no updates or changes, unless absolutely critical for operations, can be done between Black Friday and Christmas, because that is their most important shopping time of year. Last thing they want to do is have a patch like what I just had happen last week, where all of a sudden critical systems are disabled or incapable of communicating because there was an update done, and even though it tested out fine, in reality when it's put into production it didn't work. So you want to think about lockouts during critical times, and that requires understanding your business and its business cycle. And this is why working with other departments is extremely important. When you're doing patch management, you don't just work in a silo by yourself. You want to work with your key business business components such as sales, marketing, and senior management to understand how you're managing your patches is going to affect their capability to do their work. And they need to understand when you're doing your patching and what the expectation of you versus them is. So if your expectation is that you're, let's say you don't want to do patching of laptops during the day like I do, and the expectation is that the employees bring their laptops in on Mondays and leave them plugged into the network overnight Monday nights every week to get the proper patching done after hours, that's perfectly fine. That's a really good strategy right there. And it reduces bandwidth during the day when it's most critical for use by your employees. Patch management requires teamwork between you and the various teams within your organization. And once again, just like operating systems, you want to do host software baselining. So for example, with Java, you can create a baseline file that pushes out in your Java update that configures your Java to however you want it to be configured. I do this based upon our stigging guides that enable a certain level of security and requirements for Java to operate on each local host. Many organizations develop software baselines for hosts in servers to maintain an accurate picture of what the operating systems and applications are running within the organization, sometimes called a default, gold, or standard configuration. In the Army, we call it the Army Gold Master. And it's a software baseline that contains all the approved software that should appear on a desktop or server within the organization. Another thing you need to think about with host software baselining is a vulnerability scan. A vulnerability scanner is designed to probe hosts for weaknesses, misconfigurations, old versions of software, and so on. There are essentially three main categories of vulnerability scanners: network, host, and application. A network vulnerability scanner probes a host or hosts for issues across their network connections. They form a broad sweep of vulnerabilities on one or more hosts across the network. Host vulnerability scanners are designed to run on specific hosts and to look for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations on those hosts. Host scanners tend to be more specialized because they are looking for issues associated with a specific operating system or set of operating systems. An example of a host scanner is the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. And then there's the application vulnerability scanners, which are designed to look for vulnerabilities in applications or certain types of applications. Application scanners are some of the most specialized scanners. Even though they contain hundreds or even thousands of checks, they only look for misconfiguration of vulnerabilities in a specific type of application. So a good example is Nessus. Nessus is a piece of software that scans basically all three of these. It scans the network looking for hosts and the services that they provide. It then looks at the hosts and looks for specific vulnerabilities on the host and its configurations. And then it can also look at the specific applications. What is the current version of the application, and what is the security settings within those applications. So Nessus is actually a very good example of all three of these. In addition, there's also OpenVAS, or Open Vulnerability Assessment System, which is available free. I believe it's on the Kali image, and that allows you to scan for many of these things as well. So a security template is simply a collection of security settings that can be applied to a system. Within the Windows operating system, security templates can contain hundreds of settings that control or modify system settings, such as password length, auditing of user actions, or restrictions on network access. Security templates can be standalone files that are applied manually to each system, but they can also be part of a group policy, allowing common security settings to be applied to systems on a much wider scale. You can create and or modify security templates on your local system through the Microsoft Management Console if you have security template snap-in installed. Microsoft includes a series of predefined security templates that will appear under the Security Templates option in your MMC window, and these templates range from minimum to maximum security and can all be applied as is or modified as needed. Alternative environments are those that are not traditional computer systems in a common IT environment. This is not to say that these environments are rare. In fact, there are millions of these systems composed of hundreds of millions of devices all across society. Computers exist in many systems where they perform critical functions specifically tied to a particular system. These alternative systems are frequently static in nature, that is, their software is unchanging over the course of its function. Updates and revisions are few and far between. While this may seem to be counter to current security practices, it isn't, because these alternative systems are constrained to a limited, defined set of functionality. The risk for vulnerabilities is limited. Examples of these alternative systems or environments include embedded systems, SCADA systems, mobile devices, mainframes, game consoles, and in-vehicle computers. SCADA systems, or supervisory control and data acquisition systems, are designed to control automated systems in a cyber-physical environment. SCADA systems control manufacturing plants, traffic lights, refineries, energy networks, water plants, building automation, environmental controls, and a host of other systems. SCADA is also known by names such as Distributed Control Systems, DCS, and Industrial Control Systems, ICS, the variations depending on the industry and the configuration. Where computers control a physical process directly, a SCADA system likely is involved. Embedded system is the name given to a computer that is included as an integral part of a larger system. From computer peripherals such as printers to household devices like smart TVs and thermostats, to the car you drive, embedded systems are everywhere. Embedded systems can be as simple as a microcontroller with fully integrated interfaces, a system on a chip, or as complex as the tens of interconnected embedded systems in a modern automobile. Embedded systems are designed with a single control purpose in mind and have virtually no additional functionality, but this does not mean that they are free of risk or security concerns. The vast majority of security exploits involve getting a device or system to do something it is capable of doing and technically designed to do, even if the resulting functionality was never an intended use of a device or a system. The designers of embedded systems typically are focused on minimizing costs, with security seldom seriously considered as part of either the design or the implementation. Because most embedded systems operate as isolated systems, the risk has not been significant. However, as capabilities have increased and these devices have become more networked together, the risk has increased significantly. For example, smart printers have been hacked as a way into enterprises and as a way to hide from the defenders. You'll see in this week I have an additional video called The Wolf, which is provided by HP. Granted, it's a fictional story. However, it's centered around how a printer can be used to infiltrate a corporate environment or corporate network. Phones and mobile devices. We've kind of touched on this back when we were talking about mobile devices before. Android is a generic name associated with mobile OS that is based on Linux. Google acquired the Android platform, made it open source, and began shipping devices back in 2008. The Android platform continues to evolve as the code is cleaned up and the number of vulnerabilities reduced. The issue of malware-affected applications is much tougher to resolve, as the ability to create content and add it to the App Store or Google Play is considerably less regulated than in the Apple and Microsoft ecosystems. iOS is the name of Apple's proprietary operating system for its mobile platform, similar to Cisco calling theirs iOS. The only difference is that when they're referring to Apple, it's a lowercase I. When referring to Cisco, it's an uppercase I. Because Apple does not license the software for use other than on its own devices, Apple retains full and complete control over the OS and any specific capabilities. Apple has also exerted significant control over its application store, which is dramatically limited in the incidence of malware in the Apple ecosystem. A common hack associated with iOS devices and even Android devices is called jailbreaking. Jailbreaking is a process by which the user escalates their privilege level, bypassing the operating system's controls and limitations. The user still has complete functionality of the device, but also has additional capabilities, bypassing the OS-imposed user restrictions. There are several schools of thought concerning the utilization of jailbreaking, but the important issue from a security point of view is that running any device with enhanced privileges can result in errors that can cause more damage because normal security controls are typically bypassed. Mainframes represent the history of computing. Although many people think that they have disappeared, they are still much alive in the enterprise computing environment. Mainframes are high-performance machines that offer large quantities of memory and computing power and storage, Mainframes have been used for decades for high-volume transaction systems as well as high-performance computing. Mainframes have become a cost-effective solution for many high-volume applications because many instances of virtual machines can run on the mainframe hardware. This opens the door for many new security vulnerabilities, not on the mainframe hardware per se, but rather through the vulnerabilities in the guest OS in the virtual environment. Another thing that's overlooked with mainframes is that many of the older ones that have been around for a very long period of time, the code was written in much older programming languages, and the people who were involved in the programming and the creation of it may no longer be around or in the industry. So it requires people to refamiliarize themselves with the code anytime they want to go in and fix a problem. More often than not, the code goes untouched and unaltered at this point because nobody wants to touch it, nobody wants to explore it, and nobody really sees that there is a need to spend money and time on trying to find errors and problems in it that they don't know that already exist. And in this case, ignorance is bliss. They'd rather not know about it if it's there, unless, of course, they see that there is a cost advantage to fixing the problem. But it takes a lot of resources to update mainframes when, as I said, the original people who worked on it, maybe even the original company who created the mainframe, is no longer in business. I worked for a company back in 1997 when I graduated with my first degree, and they had a system that at that time was 25 years old. It was developed by students from the same university I had come from, and a professor. I was still finding, 25 years later, some security issues on the software and the configuration of the system. I can't even imagine what could be found today if these systems are still in use. Game consoles. Well, gone are the days of the simple 8-bit game consoles such as Atari or ColecoVision, and then you had your simpler computers like your Commodore 64 and some of your other 8-bit systems that were available way back when. Many systems today are computer-based game consoles, can be considered a type of embedded system designed for entertainment. The OS in the game console is not there for the user, but rather there to support the specific application or game. There typically is no user interface to the OS on a game console for a user to interact with. Rather, the OS is designed for a sole purpose. With the rise of multifunction entertainment consoles, the attack surface of a gaming console can be fairly large, but is still constrained by the closed nature of the gaming ecosystem. Updates for the firmware and OS-level software are provided by the console manufacturer. This closed environment offers a reasonable level of risk associated with the security of the systems that are connected. As game consoles become more general in purpose and include such features as web browsing, the risk increases to levels commensurate with any other general computing platform. So some of the things like the PS4 and the Xboxes that we have today are far more advanced than when this particular book was written just even a couple of years ago, which means that they're more capable of doing things, and it means that the risk is higher because of the broader capabilities of the system. Really, like for example, an Xbox is just a glorified PC that's been tweaked specifically for playing video games and have a console interface that allows you to navigate between different options. But think of all the different things on your Xbox or PS4 or whatever you have if you have a gaming system. What you can do today versus, I don't know, what you could do on the original Nintendo Entertainment System or the Atari 2600 or any of the systems that were previous to the gaming that we have today. How vehicles have changed over the years. My first vehicle was a 1980 Buick Park Avenue that I bought for $375. It needed some work on it, and I could take apart the engine and various parts of the car and be able to assemble it back together relatively easy with little concern for any electronics or computing involved. Today, however, computers are completely integrated into our cars, and our vehicle types have varied so much. It can be anywhere from a gasoline 4-cylinder Ford Focus all the way to a hybrid or a complete 100% electrical vehicle, where every depending on the type of model or depending on the type of power source that it uses, varies on what it needs for computing and managing. So your four-cylinder cars that get to, like for example, the Ford Focus that gets 35 miles to the gallon. It gets that many miles to the gallons not just because of its size, but because it's tweaked. It tweaks the engine and how it runs using computers. On top of that, and by the way, I own a Ford Focus, and I'm not doing this to push any one brand, but my Ford Focus has Microsoft Sync in it too, so it integrates with my cell phone and different aspects of the car. I can run a complete diagnostic from my screen in my sync system, and I can even send the data when it's tethered to my phone, send the diagnostic information to Ford so that they have a record of the diagnostic. So in-vehicle computing systems, motor vehicles have had embedded computers in them for years. And as I stated, regulating engine functions, specifically things such as emission and gas or fuel efficiency, environmental controls, and dashboard displays. Recently, the functionality has expanded to on-screen entertainment and navigation systems, such as the Microsoft Sync, as the functionality of the systems are expanding with the addition of networking capabilities. The same security risks associated with other networks systems emerge. As the in-vehicle computing systems continue to integrate with mobile electronics and with the coming vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-roadway communications, security risks will increase and become a pressing issue. So those you might have heard about a year ago or so, somebody hacked a Jeep, and it was actually able to lock up the brakes and lock up the steering by hacking the Jeep wirelessly. Now, think of that when we get to the fact that we're now looking at vehicles that are self-driving vehicles. Google and some other companies have invested huge amounts of money into developing driverless cars. And if that's the case, and these cars are supposed to be communicating with each other when they're driving along in order to not hit each other and to allow cars to merge into traffic and things of that sort, if they're all working together and communicating with each other, that means that the data is being transmitted. That means that these are all susceptible to security risks. So many of the alternative environments can be considered static systems. Static systems are those that have a defined scope and purpose and do not regularly change in a dynamic manner, unlike most PC environments. Static systems tend to have closed ecosystems with complete control over all functionality by a single vendor. A wide range of security techniques can be employed in the management of an alternative system. Network segmentation, security layers, wrappers, and firewall assist in securing the network connections between these systems. Manual updates, firmware control, and control redundancy assist in the security of device operation. So network segmentation. We've kind of talked about this before at virtual LANs and things of that sort. Network segmentation is the use of network architecture to limit communication between devices. A variety of networking mechanisms can be used to limit the access to devices on the network level. So logical network segmentation can be done via VLANs, MAC and IP address restrictions on routers and switches, firewall filtering, and access control mechanisms. One of the challenges with alternative systems is that the devices themselves may not have typical security controls, such as access controls or encryption, included in their function sets. This makes external controls, such as network segmentation, even more critical as part of this security solution. So therefore, if there's no security set up on one of these devices, let's say the device is the controller for the floodgates on a dam, okay, if there's no security controls built into it, then you're going to have to build some kind of a way into your perimeter to only allow the traffic you want to control that floodgate. So for example, maybe it's just one computer with one specific IP address that can get through the firewall to connect to that floodgate, and that connection through the firewall is done via VPN, which is encrypted with IPsec with a certain key. The use of different layers to perform different functions has been a staple of computer science for decades. Employing layers to enforce security aspects has also been a long-standing concept. Not all layers have the same information or processing capability, and using each layer to achieve a part of this security solution leads to more robust security solutions. While a network can manage traffic based on the networking information, this is not a complete security solution. adding additional layers such as application layer firewalls and authentication services adds additional security functions that further reduce the risk associated with a system. Application firewalls are policy enforcement mechanisms that operate at the application layer to enforce a set of communication rules. While a network firewall examines network traffic and enforces rules based on addresses, an application firewall adds significant greater ability to control an application's communication across the network. So it might be able to say that we don't like you talking to a specific computer or using a specific protocol or a specific port. And it can focus in specifically on what that application is doing. Then there's manual updates. All systems eventually require updates to fix issues, patch vulnerabilities, and even change functionality. In alternative environments, these changes are in many cases done in a manual manner. Manual updates can be used to restrict the access to the system, preventing unauthorized changes to a system. In some cases, because of scale, an automated system may be used to push out the updates, but the principle of tightly controlling access to system update functionality needs to be preserved. So, in a large environment, like for example the water supply for a major city, they could try pushing updates to the different controllers using a central system like an SCCM server. However, in reality, the best bet is probably to go and manually update each one of them. That way being, if there's a catastrophic event during an update for the software, something goes wrong, it doesn't affect multiple systems at a time. They're doing one at a time, and they can most likely override whatever the error or the problem is, doing it one at a time as opposed to causing something system-wide. One thing to note is usually software updates on larger scale automated systems such as water supply, power supply, or factories or so forth, the updates are done very rarely and usually during low usage times or when they can shut down the process completely. For example, some factories once a year will shut down, usually between Christmas and New Year's, and that's when they do a lot of their major updates and retooling when their bulk of their employees are not there and it doesn't affect productivity. So firmware is presently in virtually every system, but in many embedded systems it plays an even more critical role as it also contains the OS and the application. Maintaining strict control measures over the changing of firmware is essential to ensuring the authenticity of the software on the system. Firmware updates require extreme quality measures to ensure that errors are not introduced as part of an update process. Updating firmware, though only occasionally necessary, is a very sensitive event. For failure can lead to systems malfunctioning. If an unauthorized party is able to change the firmware of a system, as demonstrated in an attack against ATMs, an adversary can gain complete functional control over a system. But going back to catastrophic, those of you who might have tried updating firmware before and had a error or a problem when doing so may have noted that in some cases the system is what we call quote-unquote bricked. In other words, it no longer is functional at all. The system will no longer ever work. Usually it requires that the chips that contain the firmware to be replaced, or the hardware needs to be sent back to the manufacturer to have firmware reestablished on the system. Otherwise, the system just doesn't do anything at that point. So firmware and upgrading firmware is extremely sensitive, and that's one of the reasons why your embedded systems in like SCADA environments tend to very rarely update these things. TCP wrappers are structures used to enclose or contain some other systems. Wrappers have been used in a variety of ways, including to obscure or hide functionality. A Trojan horse is a form of a wrapper. Wrappers can also be used to encapsulate information, such as in tunneling or in VPN solutions. Wrappers can act as a form of channel control, including integrity and authentication information that a normal signal cannot carry. It is common to see wrappers used in alternative environments to prepare communications for IP transmission. So in a lot of these alternative environments, such as SCADA systems, the protocols that might be used on a local network to communicate between each other on the controllers, such as maybe something on a manufacturing line that tells different aspects of the line to speed up or slow down, they don't necessarily use TCP/IP to communicate. However, the protocol that they do use gets wrapped around in an IP packet in order to be transmitted to the other machine that's being
that's being communicated with, or maybe back to the human management interface for the controller to observe what's going on. Control redundancy and diversity. Defense in depth is one of the underlying security fundamentals, and this is especially needed in alternative environments. Many alternative environments are not equipped with onboard encryption, access control, or authentication services. Designing overlapping controls such as that each assist the other but does not duplicate them adds significant strength to a security solution. The objective is to raise barriers to entry, preventing unauthorized parties from reaching vulnerabilities, and to mitigate those vulnerabilities that they can reach, such that the attacker cannot proceed further. When the system is in an alternative environment, whether static or not, the principles of security still apply. In fact, in many cases they are more critical because the devices themselves have little to no security functionality, thus depend on the supporting environment to be secure. A diversity of control in redundancy and overlapping structure is the best method for providing this level of mitigation. One of the things I do recommend when I talk to people is, for example, with the firewalls in the IDS, you might want to put two different brands of firewalls using two different types of ACLs, so that if one fails, if a person gets around one of them, they have another obstacle to get around. So, like a perimeter defense where you have redundancy but not a complete duplication, in that sense, is what you're doing here. The idea is if one fails, the other one catches it, and by not having it being the same kind, whatever the vulnerability that caused the first one to fail is less likely to affect the second one. So, for example, if there's a vulnerability in the iOS of a Cisco firewall or ASA that the attacker exploits to get through it, and you have a Palo Alto or some other firewall on the other side of it, you could stop them from getting any further. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig, for Nashville Community College. Thank you for watching.